Our passage today is found in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 9. Before I went on vacation, we had been going through Acts, looking at the early church. And this is where we left off. I'm going to warn you, I am going to be reading today from the New King James Version, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So it will not line up with what's in the Pew Bibles. Exactly when you get to verse 5, the second half, you're going to go, wait, that's not in my Bible. So just be aware that that's going to happen in verse 5 and 6. But we're here in Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murders against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? Then the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? Then the Lord said to him, Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Here I am, Lord. So the Lord said to him, Arise and go to the street called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. To behold, he is praying. And in the vision he has seen a man named Ananias coming and putting his hand on him, so that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about you, about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you came, has sent me that you may receive your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales, and he received his sight at once. And he arose and was baptized. So when he received food, he was strengthened. Then Saul spent some days with the disciples at Damascus. Now I was reading from the New King James because I really like that part at the end of 5 and 6, that part that says, it is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? That's not found in the NIV. It's not found in the NASB or the ESV because it's not found in the older manuscripts. And so they leave those out because there's some manuscript issues here. And they actually believe, one of their thoughts is that it's possible that a scribe went back and filled this in because later on when Paul is giving his account to Agrippa, he mentions that Jesus said it's hard to kick against the goads. And so they say, well, they were just thinking about this when they were copying this, and so the scribe added this in. The problem is, when he's talking to Agrippa, he doesn't have so he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I think that part right there, Lord, what you want me to do, is actually kind of important. And it's important to what we're talking about a little bit today. And what we're talking about today is a question. It's the question Paul asks of Jesus. It's the question, who are you? It's a question that we're often asked. Who are you? Who are you to tell me I can't do this? Have you ever tried to tell somebody that when they were doing something they shouldn't be doing, you can't do that? well, who are you to tell me this? As a parent, our kids, they ask the question, they just don't ask it with those words. But who are you to tell me I can't? Yeah, I'm your parent, that's who I am, right? We get asked this question, who are you? And the reality is, a lot of the times, we ask that question of ourselves, who am I? I'd say that as children and teenagers, that is the bulk of what we're really asking in the world is, who am I? And I'm now 40 years old, I'm still asking that question, who am I? And I'd like to think that when I'm 80, that I'll stop asking that question, but I realize, as Trudy is shaking her head, no, you'll still be asking that question. I recognize that this is a question that we consistently ask. Who am I? Well, we have two individuals here in this passage. We have Saul and we have Ananias. They're two totally different people, right? And they answer that question, who am I, so very differently. And I have in the bulletin Exodus chapter 3, Moses, when he was called by God, asked the same question. He said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? It's a question we like to ask, who am I? Well, I'm going to tell you something. It doesn't matter. We don't like to hear that, but it doesn't matter who I am. And I think that's part of what God is trying to get at in this passage. It doesn't matter who you are. You see, Saul is not the guy any of us would have chosen. He's a murderer. As it was pointed out, he goes around. He killed Stephen. He's doing threats. He's going to Damascus to drag people out of their houses, to arrest them, possibly kill them. I like the selling them into slavery, because that's what they did. Putting them in prison. This is who he is. He's not the kind of guy that any of us would say, hey, you're going to lead a church. You're going to be the great apostle that's going to spread the gospel out into the world. No, if Paul said, who am I? It wouldn't have worked, right? If we said, who are you, Paul, to say it doesn't work. Now, Ananias is a guy who, we might choose Ananias. Ananias, he's a disciple at least. But God uses both of them, doesn't he? He says, I've got a plan for both of you. It's interesting when we go into the Old Testament and they're choosing a king for the first time, all the people would have Saul because Saul is so tall and he's the kind of guy that they would choose. And it turns out Saul was not the right kind of guy you wanted to be your king. That's why he got replaced by David. Because, Saul was kind of in it for himself. Who am I didn't matter. It doesn't matter. The question that matters is, who are you, Lord? Who are you? That's the question that matters. And Saul, as he's blinded, asks that question. Who are you, Lord? Jesus answers. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. There are lots of great answers that he could have given, big answers. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am the God of your fathers, Jacob, right? That's found in the book of Revelations. That's who he is, right? He could have had all the matter. He says, I'm Jesus. Because that's what matters, is he is Jesus. He's the one who Saul is persecuting. He is the way. And that's what matters. You see, who I am doesn't matter because God can use anybody. God could fill this pulpit with anybody. And if God is filling the pulpit, his word will be preached, you will be edified. And I realize I shouldn't say that because Trudy was just up here last week, and she's a good preacher. And she's not just anybody. I don't let just anybody come up here. But God can use just anybody. All right. Because he is Jesus. He's the one who died on the cross, who rose from the grave. He is Jesus. That's the answer that he's given. That's the answer. And Paul didn't know him before this point. Paul didn't know him. He needed to know him. We need to know him. The world needs to know him. And because Paul didn't know him, he didn't understand, he didn't comprehend who he was fighting against him. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. And then the New King James says, it is hard for you to kick against the goads. So this is an interesting phrase. Goads are the things that you prod things with. It's a sharp, pointy object. That's the literal definition of goads. Sharp, pointy object. You get the picture of the guys poking people towards the big pot that they're going to boil them in. That's the picture I get with the goad. But it's a saying. It's a Greek saying. And so some of the scholars were commenting that, well, Jesus wouldn't have said this because Jesus was Hebrew and spoke Hebrew and Aramaic. He wouldn't have used a Greek idiom. So Paul or Luke must have put this in Jesus' mouth. And, well, no, Jesus was talking to Paul of Tarsus, or Saul of Tarsus. Tarsus was a major Greek city where they had a lot of Greek learning. So Jesus is talking to Saul, and he's using Saul's vernacular, right? He's going to talk to him in a way that Saul understands. And it's a phrase that says, you are struggling futilely against somebody in authority over you. So in Jesus' response, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, and it's useless. Your persecution of me is useless. It's futile. You know, Jennifer was telling the kids they're throwing the pebbles and then the brick. Well, this is him throwing the brick, saying, no, it's useless, it's futile, and you know it's futile. And so Paul has to look at who Jesus is. He has to think about that. He has to accept that. And Jesus says, Paul then asks the next question, Lord, what must I do? So here we have Paul, the guy who's murdering Christians, who's trying to destroy the way, who comes to know Christ and says, Lord, what must I do? Because what matters is who he is, right? Then we have some other stuff that people try to argue with, and I need to point this out because I don't want you to ever get caught by somebody who's like, well, look, the Bible contradicts itself. In this passage it says that the men who were with him, they stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. And a lot of people will say, well, that's a contradiction, because later on when Paul's talking about it, they say they saw the light and didn't hear what he said. And here's the reality. Here he says they didn't see the person. Later he says they saw the light, but they didn't. So they saw the light, but they didn't see the person there. Here it says they heard a voice, and later it says they didn't hear what he said, or hear the words that were spoken. And so here they hear the voice. You know, Hannah has this tendency when she gets sad and upset, she gets, I can't even mimic the voice, but it's and she's speaking English. I hear the voice, but I don't hear what she said. And so there isn't a contradiction, and I want you to see that there's no contradiction. The Bible does not contradict itself. But so we have Paul, this Saul, this guy who murders, who finds out who Jesus is and says, all right, I'll go do it. No questions asked. Just what do you want me to do? Once he knows who Jesus is. Then we have Ananias. Ananias should know who God is, right? Ananias knows God. It says he's a disciple. And Ananias, when God says, all right, who am I going to... Ananias, he says, here I am, Lord. So he's got the I part down, right? He knows who I am. Here I am, Lord. I'm ready. And he says, all right, Ananias, I want you to go out and do something for me. Go talk to Saul. And Ananias goes, wait a minute, Lord. Wait a minute. So you got Saul over here who Jesus says, you know what, you're going to go into town and I'll give you the rest of your directions later. And he goes, all right, that sounds good. I'll go do that. You got Ananias who knows Jesus, who's been a disciple. Here's God tell him to go do something and says, are you sure? He has that question. Are you sure? Because you know what he's doing? He's forgetting who he's talking to. He's forgetting the who are you, Lord part. You see, if he was remembering who he was talking to, there would be no, are you sure, Lord? Are you sure? And I think so oftentimes we fall in that Ananias category. If God tells us to do something and we go, it doesn't work with what I think should be done. Are you sure? You know, because we have a tendency to look at who am I? I mean, that's what Moses did, isn't it? In Exodus, who am I? Are you sure, Lord, you want to send me? You know, can't you send somebody else? Send somebody else. Have somebody else do that. No. But if we think about who he is, and we keep the focus not on who I am, but on who he is, who are you, Lord? We're ready to go. And you know what? Ananias, it just took him a few more seconds to realize, oh, wait a minute. It's you, Lord. You know what you're saying. You know what you're doing. I'll go. You know, it's also thinking that sometimes we get the young Christians, the people who just come to the faith, who are much more willing to do things than some of us who have been seasoned, you know. If you ask Daniel to go talk to somebody, he's there in a heartbeat. He doesn't even think about it. You ask me to talk to somebody, you sure you want me to talk to that person? Somebody else is more eloquent than I am. But God uses us. He uses each and every one of us. When we're willing to ask, who are you, Lord? And then say, I'll do it. When we're willing to focus on that question, on the who he is, he can use us. And he calls us all from different backgrounds. Every one of us. And we all have different tasks. You know, Ananias, he's not known for being the great missionary who goes out and wins the world. No, he's the guy who went out and talked to Saul. You know, maybe that's all God's asking you to be, is the person who goes talks to Saul. The person who goes and does this, because God is a great God who is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He has a plan. He knows it. And who I am doesn't matter when it comes to being in him. Who I am is constantly changing. But who he is, it's always the same. He's always God. He's always in control. He's always loving us. So we need to be asking, who are you, Lord? Instead of asking, who am I? And I think we need to teach that to our children. To have them continually asking, who are you, Lord? I think so oftentimes we're always asking them, who are you? Instead of helping them to... I was doing this to Adam, actually, yesterday. So what are your plans? Are you staying in this job? You've got a career? Are you going to be able to support a family? Who are you? But we need to find a way to get them to see who is God as well, right? To ask that question. Will you bow with me in prayer?